Beneath the gilded ceilings of palaces and the haunting spires of fairy-tale castles, behind portraits hung in grand halls and centuries-old family crests etched in stone, lies a story not just of power and privilege, but of legacy, reinvention, and enduring mystique. The Wittelsbach dynasty, once rulers of a vast and culturally rich Bavarian kingdom, is more than just footnote in history books. Their lineage, spanning over 8 centuries, tells a tale of royal splendor and tragic downfall, of artists and dreamers, of war and peace, and of a family that continues to captivate long after the last crown was set aside. Imagine a time when dukes and kings shaped the fate of Central Europe, when alliances were forged through marriage, and empires were navigated through diplomacy and bloodlines. The Wittelsbachs were not mere spectators in this arena, they were master players. From the medieval halls of Regensburg to the twilight corridors of Nymphenburg Palace, from imperial ambitions in the Holy Roman Empire to the twilight of the Bavarian monarchy in the firestorm of the First World War, their fingerprints are on some of the most pivotal moments in European history. Yet, while their crowns may now lie in museums, the family name continues to echo through modern halls, not with commands, but with cultural impact, historical preservation, and quiet nobility. Today, the descendants of this once-reigning family walk among us not as monarchs, but as stewards of heritage and tradition. They are patrons of the arts, protectors of sacred spaces, and guardians of archives that tell the story of a region's soul. But who are they really, these modern-day Wittelsbachs? How do they reconcile a royal past with a democratic present? What roles do they play in a world that has moved on from kings and queens? And why, even now, does the world remain fascinated by their enduring presence? In a world obsessed with fast fame and fleeting power, the Wittelsbachs offer a rare glimpse into something more timeless, a narrative of legacy passed not through decrees, but through cultural memory and historical stewardship. Their castles still rise proudly above the Bavarian countryside, their names still grace streets and schools, and their stories still spark imagination in films, books, and scholarly works. This is not merely the story of a royal family. It is the story of how history lives on, not in crowns but in character. Welcome to our channel, Words of Time. In this video, we explore the Wittelsbachs today, a modern legacy. Join us as we delve into the lives of the descendants of Bavaria's royal family, uncovering how they've adapted to the modern world, maintained their influence in unexpected ways, and kept the spirit of a dynasty alive in a world far removed from the grandeur of thrones and coronations. The Wittelsbach family, one of the most enduring and influential noble dynasties in European history, traces its lineage back to the 12th century. Their origins lie in the region that today is southern Germany, particularly Bavaria, where they would go on to play a pivotal role in shaping the political, cultural, and religious landscape for centuries. The story of their ascent to power is one of ambition, calculated alliances, military prowess, and dynastic strategy, which enabled them to rise from local lords to emperors and kings who wielded considerable influence across the Holy Roman Empire and beyond. The Wittelsbach name comes from the castle of Wittelsbach near Ischia in present-day Bavaria. The earliest confirmed ancestor of the family was Otto I, Count of Shire, who lived during the 11th century. By the early 12th century, the family had acquired significant holdings, and their status began to rise when Otto V of Wittelsbach was granted the Duchy of Bavaria in the year 1280. This pivotal moment marked the family's formal entry into high nobility, and it was not long before their influence would grow far beyond their original domain. The foundation of Wittelsbach power lay in their strategic marriages and their ability to navigate the complex web of feudal politics in the Holy Roman Empire. Their ascent was cemented when Louis IV, a member of the Wittelsbach dynasty, was elected King of the Romans in the year 1315 and later crowned Holy Roman Emperor in the year 1328. Louis IV's reign was marked by a determined assertion of imperial rights, often in opposition to papal authority. His conflict with Pope John XXII was a defining feature of his rule. The emperor maintained that imperial authority did not require papal approval, setting a precedent for later disputes between secular and ecclesiastical powers. This defiance of Rome earned Louis IV both criticism and admiration, and established the Wittelsbachs as formidable rulers on the European stage. One of the key achievements of the Wittelsbachs was the consolidation of their rule in Bavaria. Over time, they managed to unify various fragmented territories and transform Bavaria into a cohesive political entity. In the 14th century, The family's possessions were divided among various branches, which led to the creation of several distinct duchies within the region. These internal divisions sometimes led to rivalry and conflict, yet they also ensured that the Wittelsbachs maintained a broad territorial presence. By the 15th century, the family had established branches in both the Upper and Lower Bavarian regions, as well as in the Palatinate and other parts of the empire. Perhaps the most prominent example of the family's influence outside of Bavaria came through the Palatinate branch of the Wittelsbachs. In the year 1408, Rupert of the Palatinate, a member of the family, became King of Germany. Although his reign was short and less impactful than that of Louis IV, it nonetheless demonstrated the dynasty's ability to project power across the empire. Additionally, members of the Palatinate line were among the prince-electors of the Holy Roman Empire, giving them a vital role in choosing the emperors. This electoral dignity, combined with strategic marriages into other noble families, further expanded their political reach. In addition to their political and military achievements, the Wittelsbachs were significant patrons of art, science, and religion. They founded and endowed monasteries, churches, and universities, most notably the University of Ingolstadt in the year 1472, which later became the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. The family's cultural patronage helped to cultivate a flourishing intellectual and artistic environment in Bavaria, attracting scholars and artists from across Europe. This commitment to cultural development was particularly notable during the Renaissance, when the Bavarian court became a center for humanist thought and artistic innovation. Religiously, the Wittelsbachs were deeply intertwined with the shifting dynamics of the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. While some branches of the family embraced Protestantism, notably the Palatinate line under Frederick III in the 16th century, others remained staunchly Catholic. This divergence created internal tensions, but also positioned the Wittelsbachs at the heart of the religious debates that were reshaping Europe. Maximilian I, Duke of Bavaria, played a crucial role during the 30 Years' War, aligning with the Catholic League and becoming one of the most influential Catholic leaders of the conflict. His military and diplomatic efforts were instrumental in sustaining the Catholic cause during this turbulent period. The family's rise continued into the modern period. In the year 1623, Maximilian I was granted the title of Elector of Bavaria, a significant elevation in status that solidified the family's political prestige within the empire. This title would remain with the Wittelsbachs until the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire in the early 19th century. Moreover, in the early 1800s, the dynasty's fortunes took another leap forward when Bavaria was elevated to the status of a kingdom under the rule of Maximilian IV Joseph, who became King Maximilian I of Bavaria in the year 1806. This transformation marked the culmination of centuries of ambition and governance and established the Wittelsbachs as monarchs of a sovereign state. As kings, the Wittelsbachs continued to modernize Bavaria, introducing constitutional reforms, promoting infrastructure development, and fostering a sense of national identity. King Ludwig I, who reigned from the early 19th century, was a notable patron of the arts and a driving force behind Munich's transformation into a cultural capital. He commissioned many neoclassical buildings and supported artists and intellectuals, laying the foundations for the city's rich artistic heritage. However, his reign ended in controversy due to his scandalous personal life and political unrest, leading to his abdication in favor of his son, Maximilian II. One of the most famous and enigmatic figures in the Wittelsbach dynasty was King Ludwig II, often referred to as the Fairytale King. Ascending to the throne in the mid-19th century, Ludwig II was known for his eccentricity, romantic idealism, and deep appreciation of art and architecture. He famously commissioned the construction of several extravagant castles, including Neuschwanstein, which remains one of the most iconic and visited landmarks in Germany today. Although criticized during his lifetime for his perceived extravagance and reclusiveness, Ludwig II's legacy has endured through the cultural and architectural treasures he left behind. The fall of the Wittelsbach monarchy came in the aftermath of the First World War. In the wake of the German Revolution of 1918, the Kingdom of Bavaria was abolished, and the last Wittelsbach king, Ludwig III, was deposed. Despite the end of their formal political power, the family has remained a symbol of Bavarian heritage and identity. Descendants of the Wittelsbach line continue to be involved in cultural, charitable, and civic endeavors, and their historical legacy is preserved in numerous castles, museums, and archives throughout Bavaria and Europe. Beyond their direct political and territorial influence, the Wittelsbachs played a significant role in the broader narrative of European history. Their dynastic alliances connected them to numerous other royal houses, including those of France, Austria, and Spain. Members of the family held titles and lands in various parts of the continent, and their actions helped shape the balance of power within the Holy Roman Empire and beyond. Their legacy is particularly evident in the cultural and religious development of Central Europe, where their patronage and political decisions left an enduring mark. The Wittelsbachs were not without their challenges and controversies. Like many noble families, they were involved in succession disputes, territorial conflicts, and political rivalries that sometimes threatened their stability. Yet, their ability to adapt and survive through changing political landscapes speaks to their resilience and strategic acumen. Their story is not merely one of power and privilege, but also of cultural stewardship, religious conviction, and a deep-rooted connection to the land and people of Bavaria. Over the centuries, the Wittelsbachs transitioned from feudal lords to emperors, from ducal rulers to constitutional monarchs. Their journey mirrors the broader evolution of European political structures from the medieval period through the modern age. They played a formative role in shaping not only Bavarian identity, but also the contours of European history. Their contributions to governance, religion, art, and architecture continue to be celebrated and studied, serving as a testament to the enduring influence of one of history's most remarkable dynasties. Even in the modern era, the Wittelsbach name carries cultural and historical weight. The family has been the subject of numerous historical studies, documentaries, and public exhibitions. Their former residences, such as Nymphenburg Palace and the Residence in Munich, attract millions of visitors annually, standing as living monuments to a lineage that helped define the spirit and character of Bavaria. Through centuries of change, conflict, and transformation, the Wittelsbachs remained steadfast in their commitment to their people, their land, and their legacy, making their story not only one of political power, but also of enduring cultural significance. The Bavarian monarchy, especially under the rule of the Wittelsbach family, underwent a remarkable transformation from a fragmented duchy into a centralized kingdom, deeply influencing not just the local governance and culture of Bavaria, but also the broader political landscape of Germany and Europe. The Wittelsbach dynasty had been central to Bavarian politics for many centuries before Bavaria officially became a kingdom, and this shift in status marked a new chapter for both the region and the ruling house. As the European political order shifted in the wake of the Napoleonic Wars and the reorganization of German territories, Bavaria rose in prominence, aided by the diplomatic skill and ambition of the Wittelsbach rulers. In the early years of the 19th century, the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire set the stage for significant restructuring in Central Europe. Maximilian IV Joseph, then Elector of Bavaria, took advantage of this political upheaval. With the support of Napoleon Bonaparte, Maximilian declared himself King of Bavaria in the year 1806. This was a monumental moment in Bavarian history, as it transformed the territory from a duchy to a sovereign kingdom. As King Maximilian I, he began laying the groundwork for modern statehood. Administrative reforms, codification of laws, and the gradual implementation of constitutional governance characterized his reign. He promoted science, the arts, and education, thereby cultivating a new Bavarian identity rooted in Enlightenment values. Throughout the 19th century, the Wittelsbach kings sought to balance tradition and modernization. This balancing act was evident in their support for industrial development alongside cultural and architectural patronage. The monarchy embraced constitutionalism in a limited form by adopting a constitution in the year 1818, which created a bicameral parliament. However, real power continued to reside with the monarch and the aristocracy. As the century progressed, Bavaria maintained a unique position within the growing German Confederation and later within the German Empire, always striving to preserve its cultural individuality and political autonomy. The reign of King Ludwig I, who ruled in the first half of the 19th century, reflected the complex role of the monarchy in an evolving society. Ludwig I was a passionate patron of the arts and architecture. Under his leadership, Munich was transformed into a cultural capital, earning the nickname Athens on the Isar. Neoclassical buildings, grand boulevards, and art collections proliferated under his watch. However, His reign was not without controversy. His romantic affairs, most famously with the dancer Lola Montez, led to political unrest and ultimately his abdication in favor of his son, Maximilian II, in the year 1848. King Maximilian II was more focused on intellectual and cultural development. He invited scholars, poets, and philosophers to his court, fostering a climate of academic and scientific inquiry. Yet even as Bavaria cultivated this intellectual renaissance, political currents elsewhere in Europe were shifting. The revolutions of 1848 had sent a strong message that monarchies could no longer ignore the rising demands for liberal reform and national unification. Although Bavaria did not experience the same level of revolutionary violence as other parts of Europe, it could not remain completely immune to these pressures. It was into this environment of cultural richness, political change, and social tension that King Ludwig II was born. Ascending the throne in the year 1864 at the young age of 18, Ludwig II remains one of the most iconic and enigmatic monarchs in European history. His reign has been remembered not for political innovation or military prowess, but for his eccentric personality, his romantic idealism, and his profound impact on the cultural landscape of Bavaria. From the beginning of his reign, Ludwig II was seen as different from his predecessors. He was intensely private, introspective, and prone to escapism. While his early years were marked by a genuine interest in governance, he quickly grew disillusioned with the political process and withdrew from public affairs. Unlike his father, Maximilian II, who maintained close relationships with intellectuals and politicians, Ludwig sought refuge in the world of music, mythology, and dreams. One of his earliest and most enduring passions was the music of Richard Wagner. Ludwig became Wagner's greatest patron, supporting the composer financially and commissioning performances of his works. Their relationship was both controversial and transformative. Wagner's mythic operas perfectly aligned with Ludwig's ideals of kingship and beauty, though many in the Bavarian court viewed the composer with suspicion and considered his influence over the king to be excessive. Ludwig's fascination with Wagner and the mythical world of Germanic legends found expression in the grand architectural projects he undertook. Among the most famous is Neuschwanstein Castle, a fantastical structure perched high in the Bavarian Alps, inspired by medieval romanticism and Wagnerian operas. The castle, with its soaring towers and intricate frescoes, embodied Ludwig's dream of a perfect world, untouched by the politics and conflicts of modern Europe. He also commissioned Linderhof Palace and began work on Herrenhausen, modeled after the Palace of Versailles, as a tribute to the French King Louis XIV, whom Ludwig admired deeply. These building projects, while aesthetically stunning and culturally valuable, placed an enormous financial burden on the Bavarian treasury. Ludwig funded much of the construction from his private funds, but the expenses inevitably spilled over into public finances. His increasing detachment from the realities of governance and his obsessive pursuit of personal dreams led to growing concerns among government ministers and members of the royal family. His nocturnal habits, preference for solitude, and frequent absences from Munich only deepened the perception that he was unfit to rule. By the early 1880s, tensions within the court had reached a breaking point. In the year 1886, a group of ministers and doctors declared Ludwig mentally unfit to rule, citing a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. They based their conclusions on testimony from servants and court officials, though Ludwig was never personally examined by any of the doctors who declared him insane. On June 12th of that year, Ludwig was officially deposed. He was taken into custody and confined to Berg Castle. The following day, he died under mysterious circumstances in Lake Starnberg, alongside the psychiatrist who had declared him insane. Official reports labeled it a suicide by drowning, but the circumstances surrounding his death remain a subject of debate and speculation to this day. The tragedy of Ludwig II's reign lies in the conflict between his visionary imagination and the practical limitations of his role as a constitutional monarch. While he was criticized in his time as being out of touch and financially reckless, later generations came to appreciate his contributions to art, culture, and national identity. The castles he built have become symbols of Bavarian heritage and are among the most visited tourist destinations in Germany. They stand as monuments to a king whose dreams, though ill-suited to his time, captured the imagination of the world. After Ludwig's deposition and death, his brother Otto succeeded him in name, becoming King Otto I of Bavaria. However, Otto had long suffered from severe mental illness and was considered unfit to rule even before his brother's deposition. He had been confined to an asylum since the early 1870s, and his mental condition rendered him incapable of performing any royal duties. As a result, a regency was established, with their uncle Luitpold assuming the role of Prince Regent. The regency of Prince Luitpold was a time of relative stability and continuity. Luitpold, though never formally king, was a respected and capable statesman who maintained the dignity of the monarchy while guiding Bavaria through an era of modernization and increasing integration into the German Empire. His popularity with the public helped to sustain the monarchy despite the embarrassing and unsettling circumstances surrounding Ludwig's death and Otto's incapacitation. Luitpold was seen as a wise and steady hand, and his leadership helped restore public confidence in the royal institution. Nevertheless, the reign of King Otto was marked by a constitutional fiction. Though Otto was legally king from the year 1886 until his death in the year 1913, he never exercised any authority. During this period, Bavaria underwent significant social and economic changes, but none of these developments were influenced by the monarch himself. The real power remained with the regents, first Luitpold and later his son, Ludwig, who would eventually be declared King Ludwig III after Otto's death. This long period of regency reflected the increasingly symbolic nature of monarchy in a constitutional framework. The scandals and controversies of Ludwig II's rule and Otto's mental illness had weakened the public's perception of royal authority, even as the state continued to function under the guidance of capable administrators. The monarchy had become more ceremonial than governing, a trend that would continue into the 20th century. The final chapter of the Bavarian monarchy came in the aftermath of the First World War. Germany's defeat and the subsequent revolution of 1918 led to the abdication of monarchs across the empire. King Ludwig III, who had succeeded Otto in name but had inherited a fundamentally altered political landscape, was forced to flee the capital. The Wittelsbach dynasty's centuries-long rule came to an abrupt end, replaced by a republican form of government. Yet even after the monarchy's fall, the legacy of the Wittelsbachs and their transformative role in Bavarian history continued to resonate. The Bavarian monarchy under the Wittelsbachs represents a fascinating intersection of political power, cultural innovation, and personal tragedy. It is a story marked by both visionary brilliance and human frailty. The transformation of Bavaria into a modern kingdom, the romantic dreams of Ludwig II, and the silent reign of Otto are chapters in a narrative that speaks to the complex dynamics of monarchy in a changing world. Though the kings are long gone, the castles they built, the institutions they shaped, and the myths they inspired remain very much alive in the heart of Bavaria and in the memory of history. The story of the Wittelsbach dynasty is not only one of crowns and kingdoms, treaties and wars, but also one of deep personal intricacies, complex family dynamics, emotional struggles, and the weight of expectation passed from generation to generation. Behind the grandeur of courts and the magnificence of castles existed a web of relationships that defined the personal lives of monarchs and shaped the very direction of Bavarian history. These relationships, between siblings, spouses, parents, and children, were often shaped by duty rather than affection, and by political convenience more than by genuine human connection. In this world, the personal was always political, and the sacrifices required by royal duty often came at a great emotional cost. At the heart of the Wittelsbach family structure lay a tension between individual desire and dynastic obligation. From an early age, princes and princesses were raised not simply as children of a family, but as heirs of a legacy. Their educations were rigorous, their conduct heavily scrutinized, and their futures planned long before they had any say in their own lives. Royal children were not just sons and daughters. They were symbols of alliances, tools of diplomacy, and future monarchs whose marriages, careers, and even personalities were often shaped by the political needs of the moment. This began with the concept of political marriages, which dominated the personal lives of the Wittelsbachs for centuries. These unions were rarely about love. Rather, they were calculated decisions designed to strengthen political alliances, secure territorial claims, and elevate the prestige of the family. From the late Middle Ages through the early modern period, members of the Wittelsbach dynasty married into virtually every significant royal house in Europe, including those of France, Austria, Spain, Sweden, and the Italian states. These alliances expanded the dynasty's influence far beyond Bavaria's borders, but also often created new burdens. Many of these marriages were marked by cultural and linguistic differences, incompatible personalities, and long periods of separation. A Wittelsbach princess might be sent to a foreign court at a young age, with little understanding of the language or customs, forced to conform to the expectations of an unfamiliar society. Similarly, foreign-born queens often faced suspicion and alienation at the Bavarian court, especially if they failed to produce heirs quickly or if they held views perceived as too liberal, too devout, or too foreign. The emotional toll of such marriages was considerable, particularly for the women, who were often caught between loyalty to their new families and the traditions of their birthplaces. One notable example of such a complex marriage was that of Emperor Louis IV, a member of the Wittelsbach family, and his marriage to Margaret II of Hainaut in the 14th century. While politically strategic, their union drew opposition from the papacy and other European powers. The controversy surrounding their marriage and Louis's subsequent excommunication by the Pope set a precedent for the way personal relationships could trigger massive political fallout. Their children, caught between conflicting religious and political forces, were forced to navigate an identity crisis that reflected the broader tensions of the time. The consequences of these political unions were not limited to external diplomacy. Within the family itself, the pressure to marry well and produce heirs often created rivalries and resentment. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as the Bavarian monarchy transitioned into a constitutional framework and public scrutiny of the royal family increased, these tensions became even more visible. The importance placed on noble bloodlines and the legitimacy of succession sometimes led to fierce battles among siblings or cousins, with family members turning against one another in pursuit of power or favor. The 19th century, in particular, brought to light the emotional cost of royal life. King Ludwig I's relationship with his children, especially his son Maximilian II, was deeply strained by differing values and personal priorities. Ludwig was a man of passion and idealism, a patron of the arts and an unapologetic romantic. His involvement with Lola Montez, an actress and dancer with a reputation for scandal, brought shame and political instability to the court. For Maximilian, who valued restraint, education, and intellectualism, his father's behavior was both an embarrassment and a burden. He was left to repair not only the political damage, but also the emotional distance that had grown between them. Maximilian's own parenting style reflected a desire for order and discipline, and while he loved his children, he often struggled to connect with them on an emotional level. His son, Ludwig II, grew up in a world of high expectations but little personal warmth. The future king developed a deep inner world, filled with music, myth, and fantasy, perhaps in part as a response to the emotional isolation he felt within his own family. While admired for his sensitivity and cultural vision, Ludwig's increasing detachment from his responsibilities and his descent into eccentricity can also be seen as the result of long-standing emotional repression and internal conflict. He never married, despite attempts by his family to arrange unions that might secure the succession, and his ambiguous sexuality further isolated him in a conservative royal court that prized appearances above authenticity. The relationship between Ludwig II and his brother Otto offers another window into the tragedy of royal life. Otto, who succeeded Ludwig as king in name only, suffered from severe mental illness that rendered him unfit to rule. From a young age, he exhibited signs of psychological instability, and his condition worsened over time. The royal family, unable to publicly acknowledge the extent of his illness due to the stigma associated with mental health, kept Otto out of the public eye and placed him under medical supervision. His life became one of confinement and loneliness, a quiet exile endured behind palace walls. Although legally king for over 2 decades, Otto never held power, his existence serving as a symbol of a monarchy increasingly divorced from real authority. The burden of mental illness within the Wittelsbach family was not confined to Otto. Several members of the dynasty displayed signs of emotional instability or psychological distress, though diagnoses were not as formalized in earlier centuries as they are today. Scholars and biographers have long speculated about hereditary mental health issues within the family, suggesting that the constant pressure to conform to royal expectations, combined with genetic predispositions, created a fragile emotional environment. These hidden tragedies, while not always visible to the public, profoundly shaped the lives of the individuals involved and the decisions they made. One of the most poignant illustrations of the emotional cost of royal duty is found in the story of Empress Elizabeth of Austria, also known as Sisi, who was born a duchess in the House of Wittelsbach. Married to Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria at a young age, Elizabeth's life became a prison of protocol and appearances. She struggled with depression, an eating disorder, and the suffocating expectations of her role as empress. Despite her beauty and public image as a romantic figure, she spent much of her life in emotional turmoil, often withdrawing from court life and traveling to escape the constraints of her position. Her tragic end, she was assassinated in Geneva, reflected the vulnerability that often lay beneath the glittering surface of royal life. The personal struggles of the Wittelsbachs were not always hidden. In the modern era, as the monarchy weakened and eventually dissolved, the family became more exposed to public scrutiny. The decline of royal power did not bring an end to the emotional burdens carried by the descendants of the crown. The abdication of King Ludwig III following the end of the First World War marked not only a political rupture, but a deep identity crisis for the family. For centuries, their role had been defined by rule and tradition. With the monarchy abolished, the Wittelsbachs had to find a new purpose in a society that no longer deferred to nobility. In the years that followed, members of the family pursued various paths. Some became involved in cultural and charitable organizations, while others withdrew into private life. Yet even without a throne, the weight of history and family legacy continued to press down. The psychological toll of generations of duty, sacrifice, and suppressed individuality did not disappear with the fall of the monarchy. Rather, it lingered in the stories of descendants, the empty halls of castles now turned into museums, and the public's continued fascination with the lives of those once born to rule. The Wittelsbachs, like many royal families, lived at the intersection of the personal and the political. Their lives were shaped not just by laws and treaties, but by emotions, fears, hopes, and sorrows, many of which were never publicly acknowledged. Political marriages may have served the interests of the state, but they often left behind broken hearts and isolated individuals. Hidden tragedies, such as mental illness or personal loss, were endured in silence behind palace doors. And even within the safety and privilege of royal life, members of the family often felt more confined than free. The story of the Wittelsbachs, when viewed through the lens of family dynamics, reveals a profoundly human dimension beneath the gold and velvet of royal ceremony. It shows how the very structures meant to preserve dynastic stability often created emotional fragility. The constant balancing act between public duty and private desire, between tradition and change, defined not only the history of a monarchy, but the lives of the people who lived within it. Their legacy, preserved in history books and echoed through their palaces, is not just one of power and influence, but of longing, loss, and the universal search for meaning beyond the crown. The story of the fall of the Bavarian monarchy is deeply entwined with the broader currents of European history, particularly the immense upheavals brought about by the First World War and the subsequent collapse of centuries-old institutions across the continent. For over 700 years, the Wittelsbach dynasty had shaped Bavarian life, its rulers evolving from medieval dukes to constitutional kings. Yet, by the early 20th century, the foundations of the monarchy had begun to erode. Social unrest, rising nationalist sentiment, economic hardship, and the devastating impact of global conflict ultimately coalesced into a revolutionary wave that swept away the crown, not just in Bavaria but throughout Germany. The fall of King Ludwig III in the year 1918 marked the end of a dynastic epoch and the beginning of a republic, reshaping Bavaria and altering the course of German history forever. The First World War was a defining force in this transition. When war broke out in the summer of 1914, the general atmosphere in Germany, including Bavaria, was one of patriotic enthusiasm. Nationalistic fervor swept through all corners of the German Empire, uniting disparate regions, classes, and political parties under a common cause. Bavaria, though a kingdom within the empire, aligned itself fully with Berlin. King Ludwig III, who had come to the throne in the year 1913 following the death of his cousin King Otto, was a loyal supporter of the war effort. He publicly expressed his solidarity with Emperor Wilhelm II and urged his subjects to fight for the fatherland. However, the initial optimism of the war quickly gave way to the grim reality of prolonged conflict. As the years dragged on, the cost in human lives, economic stability, and social cohesion became intolerable. Food shortages, rampant inflation, and mounting casualties deeply affected Bavarian society. The enthusiasm that had once characterized the beginning of the war was replaced with disillusionment and anger. The monarchy, long seen as the symbol of national unity and stability, was increasingly viewed as disconnected from the suffering of ordinary people. The royal family, insulated by privilege and tradition, struggled to maintain relevance in a world that was rapidly changing. King Ludwig III, though personally pious and dutiful, was not a charismatic leader who could inspire confidence in times of crisis. He had ascended to the throne during a period of ceremonial stability, but his reign coincided with unprecedented turbulence. He lacked the political deftness and popular appeal required to steer the monarchy through the storm of modern war. As commander-in-chief of Bavarian forces, he held an important symbolic role, yet the real military decisions were largely made in Berlin. The centralization of power within the German imperial structure left Ludwig with little autonomy, and his inability to distance himself from the increasingly unpopular imperial government only further eroded his standing among his subjects. Meanwhile, the social and political landscape of Germany was undergoing a profound transformation. The hardships of war had radicalized large segments of the population. Socialists, Republicans, and even moderate reformers began calling for sweeping changes to the political system. Worker councils, modeled on the Soviet example, began to form across Germany, and Bavaria was no exception. Revolutionary sentiment was especially strong among returning soldiers, who felt betrayed by a monarchy that had led them into a futile and devastating conflict. Discontent with the ruling elite was amplified by the perception that the royal family and aristocracy had escaped the worst consequences of the war, living in relative comfort while the working class bore the brunt of the suffering. The revolution began in earnest in the early days of November in the year 1918. In Bavaria, as in other parts of Germany, workers' and soldiers' councils began to assert control over local governments. On November 7th, in the capital city of Munich, a mass demonstration organized by the Independent Social Democratic Party and other revolutionary groups turned into a full-scale uprising. The crowd, composed largely of soldiers and workers, demanded an end to the monarchy, the establishment of a republic, and immediate peace. That evening, Kurt Eisner, a prominent socialist and pacifist, declared Bavaria a free state and proclaimed the Wittelsbach monarchy deposed. King Ludwig III, who had already sensed the shifting tides, fled Munich with his family on November 7th. He did not formally abdicate at that moment, hoping that order would soon be restored and that he might be allowed to return under a constitutional arrangement. However, events quickly overtook him. On November 9th, Emperor Wilhelm II abdicated in Berlin, signaling the collapse of the imperial order. 2 days later, on November 11th, the armistice was signed, bringing the war to an end but leaving the country in a state of political chaos. In this atmosphere, any hopes for the restoration of monarchical authority faded rapidly. Ludwig issued a proclamation on November 12th, not as an abdication, but as a statement that he was releasing officials and military officers from their oaths of allegiance. This carefully worded message was an attempt to preserve the dignity of the crown without formally surrendering it. Yet the new Republican government, led by Eisner, regarded the monarchy as abolished. Over the next weeks, revolutionary fervor spread across Bavaria, and the institutions of the old order were dismantled. The royal family retreated into private life, and their properties were seized or placed under state control. The immediate aftermath of the fall of the monarchy was tumultuous. Bavaria experienced a period of political instability marked by competing factions and shifting alliances. Kurt Eisner's government, though initially welcomed by many, struggled to maintain authority. Eisner himself was assassinated in February of the following year, plunging the region into further chaos. What followed was the short-lived Bavarian Soviet Republic, a radical experiment in socialist governance that was eventually crushed by conservative forces. This period of upheaval reflected the deep divisions within Bavarian society and the power vacuum left by the collapse of the monarchy. Despite the violent and chaotic nature of the transition, the Wittelsbach family chose not to contest the new republic by force. Unlike in other monarchies where counter-revolutionary efforts led to civil conflict, the Bavarian royals largely accepted their new status as private citizens. King Ludwig III spent his remaining years in exile in Austria and later in Hungary. He died in 1921, never having returned to political life or reclaimed the throne. His quiet withdrawal from public affairs helped to ensure a relatively peaceful transition from monarchy to republic in Bavaria, even if it was marked by instability in the short term. The end of the monarchy did not erase the memory or influence of the Wittelsbachs. Though stripped of political power, the family retained a significant cultural and symbolic role in Bavaria. Many Bavarians continued to view the royal family with affection, especially in the years following the war, when the hardships of the Weimar period and the rise of extremist ideologies led some to look back nostalgically on the perceived stability of the monarchical era. The castles and palaces built by the Wittelsbachs, particularly those associated with King Ludwig II, remained potent. In the decades that followed, members of the Wittelsbach family dedicated themselves to various forms of public service and cultural preservation. Some took part in charitable endeavors, others worked to maintain the family's historical legacy. The restoration and maintenance of former royal residences became a priority, both for the family and the Bavarian government, recognizing their value as part of the national heritage. Many of these sites, such as Nymphenburg Palace, Regency am See, and Neuschwanstein Castle, became major tourist attractions, drawing visitors from around the world and contributing to Bavaria's economy and cultural reputation. The family also played a discreet role during the Second World War and the post-war period. While most members stayed out of active politics, some were vocal in their opposition to National Socialism, and a few suffered persecutions as a result. After the war, Bavaria became a key region in the rebuilding of Germany, and the legacy of the monarchy was treated with a measure of respect by both state officials and the public. The Wittelsbachs, while no longer in power, were acknowledged as an important part of the historical fabric of the region. By the time the Federal Republic of Germany was established in the late 1940s, the possibility of restoring the monarchy had become increasingly remote. Republicanism had taken deep root, and most Germans, including Bavarians, favored democratic governance. However, the memory of the monarchy endured in ceremonial traditions, public commemorations, and popular imagination. In the years that followed, descendants of the royal family occasionally appeared at cultural events or in the media, often portrayed not as would-be rulers, but as custodians of a rich and complex past. Today, the legacy of the Bavarian monarchy and the Wittelsbach dynasty continues to shape the identity of the region. The dynasty's contributions to art, architecture, religion, and statecraft are still visible in the urban landscapes of cities like Munich and Regensburg. Their former palaces are filled with artifacts of a bygone age, and their portraits hang in museums and public buildings, silent witnesses to centuries of history. The story of their fall, while marked by loss, is also a reflection of historical evolution, the passage from feudal tradition to modern democracy. The fall of the Bavarian monarchy was not a single moment, but a culmination of forces building over decades. The strain of global war, the failure of political reform, the rise of social movements, and the inability of the monarchy to adapt all played their part. Yet the end was not ignoble. It came with dignity, restraint, and a quiet acknowledgement of change. King Ludwig III, though not a transformative monarch, embodied the end of an era with a sense of responsibility and peace. His decision not to fight the revolution, not to resist the tide of history, allowed Bavaria to move forward without civil war or prolonged violence. The Wittelsbachs may have lost their crown, but they never entirely lost the affection of their people. Their name, once synonymous with power, became instead a symbol of heritage. In this sense, their legacy did not vanish with the monarchy, it transformed. It became part of the collective memory of a region that had known kings, emperors, and revolutionaries, and had emerged into a new era shaped by democracy, modernity, and reflection. Through their buildings, their stories, and their historical significance, the Wittelsbachs continue to live on beyond the crown. The Wittelsbach family, one of the oldest dynasties in European history, traces its lineage back to the early 12th century and ruled Bavaria for more than 700 years. Although the monarchy was officially abolished in the wake of the First World War, the descendants of the royal house continued to play roles in cultural, social, and political life, both in Germany and beyond. Today, the Wittelsbachs no longer hold political power, yet their name carries immense historical weight. Their presence is still felt in many areas of Bavarian and broader German society. The story of the Wittelsbachs did not end with the fall of the monarchy. Rather, it entered a new chapter, one shaped by heritage, civic involvement, and an enduring connection to the identity of Bavaria itself. In the modern era, the head of the Wittelsbach family is Franz, Duke of Bavaria, a great-grandson of King Ludwig III, the last reigning monarch of Bavaria. Born in 1933 during the turbulent interwar period, Franz has lived through some of the most dramatic moments of modern German history, including the Second World War, the division and reunification of Germany, and the transformation of Europe. Though he holds no official political position, Franz is widely respected both within Bavaria and internationally for his quiet dignity, his involvement in philanthropic causes, and his commitment to preserving the historical and cultural legacy of his family. As a child, Franz experienced the dangers of the Nazi era firsthand. The Wittelsbach family was openly opposed to Adolf Hitler and his regime, and as a result, several family members faced persecution. Franz and other close relatives were arrested in 1944 and imprisoned in the concentration camps of Sachsenhausen and later Dachau. Though they survived, the trauma left a lasting mark. This chapter in the family's history is a powerful reminder that even those born into aristocracy were not immune to the horrors of totalitarianism. Franz's survival and subsequent rise as the symbolic head of the family underscore the resilience that has defined the Wittelsbach line across generations. In the post-war period, Franz has maintained a low public profile, preferring to focus on charitable work, historical preservation, and cultural patronage. He is a patron of the arts, a supporter of religious and academic institutions, and a committed voice for reconciliation and historical memory. Though he lives as a private citizen, he retains certain ceremonial roles in traditional Bavarian society. He attends important regional events and is often present at religious festivals, exhibitions, and memorial services. To many Bavarians, his presence symbolizes continuity with a proud and deeply rooted past. The younger generation of the Wittelsbach family has adapted to life in a democratic and increasingly globalized world. Members of the extended family have pursued careers in law, business, art, education, and diplomacy. They have embraced modern professions while remaining conscious of their historical identity. Some have taken active roles in foundations, historical societies, and charitable organizations that aim to promote Bavarian culture, preserve heritage sites, and support humanitarian causes. The family's continued presence in these areas reflects their shift from rulers to stewards of history and culture. One of the most notable contributions of the Wittelsbachs in recent decades has been their role in the preservation and restoration of historical properties. The Wittelsbach Compensation Fund, established after the monarchy's dissolution, manages many former royal residences, art collections, and archives. While ownership of these properties is now largely in the hands of the Bavarian state, the fund ensures that the legacy of the dynasty remains accessible to the public. Castles such as Neuschwanstein, Nymphenburg, and Herrenchiemsee attract millions of visitors each year and are maintained not merely as tourist attractions, but as living museums that narrate the long and complex history of the Bavarian monarchy. Art and culture have always been central to the Wittelsbach identity. From the Renaissance through the Romantic era, the family were great patrons of painting, sculpture, music, and architecture. This tradition continues today in more modern forms. Members of the family contribute to museums and cultural institutions, and their names appear in connection with festivals, academic conferences, and heritage exhibitions. These contributions serve to bridge the past and present, emphasizing how royal history can enrich contemporary cultural life rather than simply existing as a relic of bygone times. The Wittelsbachs have also become a symbol of Bavarian distinctiveness within the larger German Federation. Bavaria maintains a strong sense of regional pride, with its own traditions, dialects, and political character. The continued relevance of the Wittelsbach name in Bavaria is tied closely to this regional identity. While other former royal families in Germany have faded from public memory, the Wittelsbachs remain part of the cultural consciousness. Their castles, family crest, and historical narratives are integrated into the educational curriculum, tourism industry, and popular media. For many Bavarians, the family represents not just a historical dynasty, but a living connection to the region's golden age. Beyond Germany, the Wittelsbachs have connections to other royal and noble families throughout Europe. Through centuries of strategic marriages, they are related to the royal houses of Austria, Spain, Sweden, and the United Kingdom, among others. These familial ties, while no longer politically significant, continue to be honored in royal gatherings, historical commemorations, and genealogical research. The family's participation in these events underscores their status as one of Europe's most venerable dynasties. Despite the changes brought about by the end of monarchies and the rise of republics, there remains a unique international fraternity among former royal houses, and the Wittelsbachs are among its most respected members. The idea of a monarchical restoration has been raised from time to time, particularly by nostalgic or monarchist groups in Bavaria. However, neither Franz nor any official family representative has pursued this path. The consensus within the family has been one of acceptance of the republic and a focus on cultural and historical work rather than political ambition. This stance has earned them considerable respect and has allowed them to maintain their relevance in modern German society without provoking controversy or division. In addition to their cultural and historical work, the Wittelsbachs have increasingly become involved in environmental and conservation efforts. Several members of the family support initiatives related to climate change, heritage conservation, and rural development. These efforts reflect a modern understanding of nobility not as a privilege, but as a responsibility, a duty to protect the natural and cultural heritage that defines a nation's character. This evolution from rulers to responsible citizens aligns with broader trends across Europe, where former royal families have taken on new roles in civil society. One area where the Wittelsbachs have left an especially enduring mark is the visual landscape of Bavaria. The architecture associated with the dynasty is among the most celebrated in Europe. The dreamlike quality of King Ludwig II's castles continues to inspire artists, writers, and filmmakers. Neuschwanstein Castle, in particular, has become an icon of romanticism and is often cited as the inspiration for fairy tale imagery around the world. This artistic legacy has transcended borders and languages, embedding itself in global culture and imagination. The family's historical archives also remain a rich resource for scholars. Containing centuries of correspondence, administrative records, personal diaries, and art collections, these archives offer valuable insights into European political, social, and cultural history. Academic interest in the Wittelsbachs has continued to grow, with numerous biographies, studies, and exhibitions dedicated to various members of the family, from medieval dukes to modern philanthropists. These scholarly pursuits help ensure that the family's legacy is not just preserved, but understood in depth and in context. In education, the influence of the Wittelsbachs can still be felt. Schools, streets, and public buildings across Bavaria bear the names of past monarchs and princes. Historical figures such as King Maximilian I, King Ludwig I, and King Ludwig II are included in the regional curriculum, not just as rulers, but as complex individuals whose decisions and personalities shaped the course of Bavarian development. This educational presence further anchors the family's legacy in the daily lives of Bavarians. The modern Wittelsbachs walk a delicate line between past and present. They embody centuries of tradition while living in a society that prizes democracy, equality, and transparency. They cannot return to their former status as sovereigns, nor do most wish to. Yet their story continues to evolve, informed by the values of modern Europe and shaped by a sense of historical responsibility. Their ability to adapt, to preserve without clinging, and to contribute meaningfully to society has ensured that the Wittelsbach name still commands respect and admiration well into the 21st century. There is something uniquely compelling about families who have witnessed and endured the rise and fall of empires. The Wittelsbachs have seen their kingdom vanish, their influence wane, and their world change beyond recognition. Yet in the face of these transformations, they have found new ways to contribute. They have embraced their role not as rulers but as keepers of memory, guardians of tradition, and voices for cultural continuity. In doing so, they have helped to define what legacy truly means. Legacy is not simply about power or titles. It is about the impact left on the world and the values passed down through generations. The Wittelsbachs, though no longer crowned, have demonstrated that legacy can endure without thrones. Their story is one of transformation and resilience, of finding purpose in changing times, and of connecting the past to the present with dignity and care. As long as Bavarian churches ring their bells, as long as travelers gaze in awe at fairytale castles, and as long as history remembers the names of those who shaped it, the Wittelsbachs will remain a vital thread in the fabric of European identity.